who gets national attention for our area by making statements like Democrats are mass shooters, or making statements like Democrats are un-American, or people who disagree with the president are un-American because they don't stand for the president during the State of the Union. We don't want a representative who gets national attention for saying that domestic violence is not a crime of character when she was talking about the Rob Porter situation happening in the White House. We don't need a representative who wants to blame the deep state for Ben Carson's $31,000 dining room table. We don't need that kind of attention in this area when our representative does those kinds of things. And when you make these kinds of inflammatory remarks, it's particularly hard to get people to want to work with you. You know, if I'm going to start offending everybody, I don't think you're going to want to work with me. And what we need right now in Congress is a representative who can work with others to actually get things done. That's what we're lacking right now in Washington, is people who can actually go there and accomplish things and actually get things done for their congressional districts. So we know all about Claudia Tenney. We know what a bad representative she is for our area, and how she has taken votes that are directly in contrast with what we need in this district. But that's not good enough. I don't want you to be here because you don't like Claudia Tenney, okay? I want you to be here because you like Anthony Brindisi, and you're going to go out and get Anthony Brindisi elected. That's what I really want you to be here for. So I decided that what I'm going to do in this campaign, and she's going to run a very negative campaign. You can mark my words. That is her style. She's already started, from attacking me right out of the gate. But that's the kind of campaign she's going to run, because she does not have a record to run on. And when you don't have a record to run on, you're going to attack your opponent. But I want you to know more about me and where we stand on the issues. We know on an issue like health care where she stands. She voted for a health care bill that would take millions of people off of their health insurance, that would raise rates for people with pre-existing conditions, that would make it easier for insurance companies to discriminate against certain kinds of essential health benefits. That's where she stands. I want to see health care expanded to everybody in this country who does not have health insurance. I want to fix the Affordable Care Act. We need to stabilize our insurance markets. There are problems with the Affordable Care Act, but we can do things to help fix those problems, to help bring down rising premiums and drug costs that are driving up healthcare costs all across our country. When it comes to taxes, we know where she stands. She was in the minority of House Republicans in New York State to vote for a tax bill that essentially gives 80% of the benefits to the top 1% in this country. That a tax bill that we're seeing now, over 50% of the people in this country are seeing little or no effect whatsoever. But we're seeing major windfalls to Apple or Berkshire Hathaway or other multinational corporations, and nothing coming back to the workers who truly need a tax cut. I'm not against tax reform. I want to see tax cuts, but I want to see tax cuts for working individuals, for middle-class families, for people that we see on the street, people in this room, people in our neighborhoods. Because when we get a tax cut, we are going to take that money and we're going to spend it in our local economy, which is going to generate more sales tax revenue and make our area a better place to live. That's the kind of tax reform that we need to see out of Washington. You know, on issues like education, she supports that Trump DeVos budget that just wants to privatize public education. I got involved in politics because I am a firm believer in public education, and I don't believe a child's zip code should dictate the quality of education they receive. So whether you're in a poor urban area or a poor rural area, we need to be investing in education. We need to be investing in early childhood education, making sure students have pathways that will lead them to good paying jobs that are available in our area. And we're not going to do that by siphoning money away from our public schools to fund voucher systems for private schools. That's a big difference between her and I in this campaign. Social Security, Medicare, women's health issues, LGBTQ issues, you name it. I can go on and on and on about the differences between Claudia Tenney and I, and I'm going to answer all your questions in a second, but that's where we stand right now. And this is going to be one of the most competitive races, probably the most competitive race we've ever seen in this area this year. They are going to throw everything they can. Because she voted for the health care repeal, because she voted for the tax bill, there is going to be loads of dark special interest money that's going to come flooding into this district to try and keep her in office. I have chosen a different pathway, okay? I have chosen not to accept any corporate PAC money in my election because I don't want to owe favors when I get to Washington. I want to be building a grassroots campaign that is something we can all be proud of, that is funded by individuals, and despite the fact that she is taking pretty much nothing but corporate PAC money, and we are leading the country, really, in the top 20 in the whole country in individual contributions, we are actually out fundraising Claudia Tenney. And we're doing it with small dollar donations. Make no mistake, we like the $5,400 checks too, if you can write that as an individual, feel free to. But we also are very happy that people are reaching out to this campaign to make an investment, because that's what really is going to get us over the edge. The people that have stepped up to contribute individually. My favorite story, I tell it all the time, but it's my favorite story from the campaign trail, of a woman who reached out to our campaign who got a $17 tax cut from this latest tax bill. And she was talking to her boss, and her boss asked her, what are you going to do with your $17 tax cut? Well, she said, I'm going to donate it to Anthony Brindisi for Congress. We really need real tax reform, and this is not cutting it. So that's the kind of stories we're hearing from throughout the congressional district of people supporting this campaign. So I'll end with just saying thank you to all of you. You could be doing anything on this beautiful sunny day, but you chose to be here. And I can tell you that it means the world to me to see such support throughout the community. And you can rest assured that when I am in office, it will not be showing up in Chenango County or Oxford just when I'm campaigning. We are going to be doing town halls on a regular basis. We are going to have a very aggressive constituent services, much like Richard Hanna did. You actually get responses when you call the office, and you're going to see me a lot. So I'm very happy that you've all decided to come here and help invest in this campaign. And we're going to win. We're going to win.
Yes,
I'm happy to take any questions you guys have. Yes.
What's your stance on gun control?
Yes.
As far as reforms go?
Absolutely. So we need reforms. I will tell you that I am someone who is very supportive of the Second Amendment. We have a lot of folks who own firearms because they enjoy hunting, they enjoy going out to target practice. In many rural areas, because you live farther away from a police station, perhaps you own a firearm because you want to feel more protected in your home. And I respect that. But I also understand that we need to do something to cut down on the gun violence and the mass shootings that we're seeing across this country. So first and foremost, I am not taking any money from the NRA or the gun lobby, unlike my opponent who takes all kinds of money from the gun lobby. We need to start by where we can agree the most. And one thing that 90% of Americans, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, seem to agree on is expanding background checks. Okay, most of the gun violence that's committed in New York State, we have universal background checks in New York State, but most of the gun violence that's committed in this state happens by people who purchase firearms in other states, particularly down south, that have very lax background check laws. And then they take those firearms and they bring them up to New York State, and they are sold illegally and then used for gun violence purposes. So we need expanded background checks across this entire country. It's unconscionable that this has not happened already. You should not be able to purchase a firearm if you are a criminal, if you are violently mentally ill, if you have committed domestic abuse, those kinds of things. So that's an area where we should start. Some of the things that I just voted on in the state, which I think are something we need to be looking at nationally. We voted on a bill, which I supported, to say that if you are convicted of domestic violence, you shouldn't own a firearm.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
Right.
To me, that's just common sense. She criticized me for that one, but to me, that's just common sense. If you are an extreme risk and a family member is aware of that, or law enforcement, they should be able to petition the court to have firearms removed. That's something we passed here in New York State. They won't even talk about that at the federal level. Other things, strengthening the NICS background check system instead of cutting it. There's so many things that we can be doing, but we can't do it with people like Claudia Tenney in office because she is not for any reform. Nothing. She doesn't want to talk about any new kinds of reform, but we got to have these conversations.
How about assault weapons and bump stocks?
Well, bump stocks, I did vote to ban bump stocks. I'm not supportive of these high-capacity magazines. The assault weapon issue is, I want to read the bill, okay, because everyone has a different definition of what they consider an assault weapon. And what I don't want to see is there are certain firearms that I've seen on certain lists of members' bills that have not been used in some of these shootings. So I want to be respectful of people's right to own firearms. If they're following the law, they're using it for recreational purposes or hunting or whatever, fine. But I think we got to start in an area where we can really agree, and that's on expanded background checks. Sorry.
What 3 personal characteristics do you think you have that make you most qualified to be elected?
I think
Or should make you qualified to be elected, excuse me.
a few things that I would say. I think the best characteristic that any elected official can possess is that they are a good listener. I am someone who will tell you right off the bat, I don't have the answers to every single issue that's out there. But I am someone who's going to listen to all sides of a conversation. I'm going to deliberate and try and seek out people who are experts in whatever area it is that we're trying to figure out and solicit feedback. And then make a decision which I think is in the best interest of the people that I represent. So many politicians that I see think they know everything. And you ask them a question and they're an expert on every topic. I will be the first to admit I'm not an expert. And I'm learning a lot more about all the subject matter that we're going to be discussing as we move on to Washington. But I'm someone who's going to listen, I'm going to show up, and I'm going to listen to the concerns of the people in this district. And I think that's the best thing you can do as a representative, because if you're not listening, I don't know how you can go and vote in Washington, because you just don't know what the answers are. So you got to be a good listener first. You got to be honest. You have to be honest, and you got to be upfront with people. You're not going to agree with every single thing that I do, okay? But if I'm not there talking to you, explaining why I voted a certain way, one thing that Congressman Hanna always did, which I'm going to do again when I get in office, is every bill that he voted on, he always had an explanation on his Facebook page or some on his website saying why he voted for that issue. And I think that's a good thing, because you get a better understanding of where he was coming from. And then when you did have questions, you actually got a response from his office as to what he felt on that issue. So I think you got to be honest, and I think you got to be hardworking. This is not an easy job. This is not an easy job. I decided that I'm going to give this thing 110%. It's a large congressional district. There's 8 counties that encompass this district, but I've always been a very hard worker. I'm not interested in the overseas trips. I'm not interested in rubbing elbows with CEOs or people down in Washington, getting my picture on Fox News or CNN or whatever. I'm a hard worker, and I will put every single last ounce of my effort into this job, because I came into public service because ultimately I want to help people, and I'm going to work my butt off to do that.
Great answer.
Thank
You certainly have to represent us, the 22nd district.
Yes.
But how do you also have to represent the nation? I mean, Congress, and I see so many partisan Congress people,
Right.
both Senate, and so how do you address that?
The big issue that I have, and I was always brought up to respect public service, and I truly believe that Congress is capable of doing really good things. Congress has like a 14% approval rate, or 12, whatever it is these days. But Congress, if you look at the course of history in our country, And you will find that Congress actually accomplished some great things throughout the course of our history. Whether it's ending slavery, whether it's creating programs like Medicare or Social Security, the civil rights, Congress is capable of doing good things. But ultimately you have to have good people there who can accomplish these things. And you have to have people who are not afraid to compromise to get things done. Now, I have very firm beliefs in issues, and I know that people are going to have very firm beliefs in issues, but I think we got to get up to a point where we can shift the pendulum back a little bit in this country, away from the extreme to the center, where we can actually get things done. That's an important quality. I think as a nation we'll benefit more from that. So we got to be able to work across the aisle if we can find a way to compromise. I'm not saying give up all of our values, but I'm saying that when we get things done, we can reach across the aisle. And you also have to be a representative, I believe, that's not afraid to speak out against your party when you think the party's wrong. That's something we don't have right now. She will never speak out against the president. She will never speak out against Paul Ryan. And to me, as a representative, if you look at my track record, I have not been afraid to speak out against the governor, who is the Democratic leader of the state of New York, on issues that I disagreed with him. I mentioned public education as something that's very important to me. A few years back, he wanted to, and he ultimately did, was successful in getting a new law passed, which, in my opinion, created more emphasis on testing in our K through 12 schools, and then tying those tests to teacher performance and student evaluations. And I didn't agree with that. I represent the city of Utica. Utica is one of the highest need school districts. We have a very large refugee and immigrant population, and many of the refugees that come to Utica are coming from war-torn countries all over the world, and because of federal mandates, they are expected, these young people are expected to take the same test within a year that their counterpart who's been here all their life is expected to take. Now, you're going to tell me that you're going to tell the teacher that if you can't get that student who doesn't speak English, who probably never had formal education in their country, or their education was interrupted because they were in a refugee camp, you're going to tell the teacher that if you can't get that child to perform within a year, you're going to be fired, or you're going to lose your job? I didn't agree with that. So I spoke up against the governor. I was one of a handful of Democrats to oppose that legislation, and he didn't like that. That's just something that I've always done. We had an issue in the state assembly a few years back. The speaker, Sheldon Silver, was brought up on some charges for misusing his office, and I was one of the first handful of Democrats to actually speak out and say, this can't continue. He is no longer, in my opinion, I don't think he should serve in the capacity of the Speaker of the Assembly. Now, at the time, I knew the stories, and it was tough to do that. When those allegations first came out, there was a lot of people in the party that said, we got to circle the wagons, we got to protect Shelley. And I said, absolutely not. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to represent the state and the best interests of the people of the state. So I spoke out, and ultimately we were able to prevail because enough younger members were able to speak out and actually get him removed from being the speaker, which I think was the right thing to do.
How do you see the future of this area, and does agriculture play anything in your mind?
Absolutely. So agriculture is probably our top industry in this area, and I think that while I'm learning a lot more about agriculture, one of the challenges that I see right now, an immediate challenge for our region, is with our dairy farmers. I was doing some farm tours a couple weeks ago up in Oneida County, and we have about, I think, 225 dairy farms in Oneida County. And the folks I was talking to had told me that they think within the next year we may lose 20 or 25 of those farms. Because for those who are familiar with what's going on with dairy farmers right now, milk prices are very, very low, historically low. And because of that, dairy farmers are suffering because they don't have the ability to set their own price. They rely on the federal milk pricing formula, and because it's so low right now, many farms are going out of business. Many farms are, there was one story which breaks my heart, and it was in the New York Times about a dairy farmer who actually committed suicide, ended up killing all of his cows and then went out and killed himself because they can't borrow anymore, they are up to their eyeballs in debt, and this is the end of the road if they can't see some relief very soon. So one thing that I am very supportive of, which Senator Gillibrand is working on right now at the federal level, is to have some kind of an insurance program, very similar, you hear about these subsidies that are going to these big Midwestern farms. The corn and soybean industry has been very successful in lobbying for subsidies when prices of corn or soybean fall too low. We need something similar for dairy farmers. We are the third largest dairy producer in the country in New York State, and it's our #1 agricultural product. And if we lose these farms, it will devastate parts of our region, because you're not only losing the farm, you're going to lose other businesses that rely on those farms, whether it's the tractor supply company, whether it's the feed company, whether it's the credit company. It's going to have a ripple effect, and we want to make sure that we're protecting our dairy farmers. People outside of New York don't always think of New York State as an agricultural state. You think of Wall Street, the financial sector, but it's one of our biggest industries, and we have to have louder voices in Congress speaking on behalf of our farmers here in New York State, not just dairy farmers, vegetable growers, livestock, you name it. We have to be more forceful at the federal level, because they're very strong in the Midwest and out west with some of these big corporate farms. And one of the things that's really bothering me right now is, when you talk about dairy, Walmart. Walmart's building this giant distribution processing center in Indiana, where they're going to basically own everything from the cow up to the packaging and put it in their stores. That's going to hurt a lot of small to medium-sized dairy farmers. There's been, in like many areas of our economy, there's been too much consolidation of some of these bigger farms that are really pushing some of the smaller and medium-sized farms out of business.
Is there alternative to subsidies?
I think there's probably other ideas out there. I'm willing to listen to anything, but I think we have to have some kind of insurance program or a reworking of the dairy formula to help our dairy farmers, particularly the small and medium-sized ones. So I'm willing to listen to anything, but we got to do something, because we don't want to lose these businesses. We can do our part too. One thing I learned a lot more about is, it was probably not the right decision at the federal level to move towards just skim milk in our schools. And when you take the fat out of the milk, it's less that the dairy farmer actually gets for the milk. And frankly, they put more sugar in skim milk. They're finding more and more that the fat in milk is good fat. It's good for brain development. It's good for fighting back against Alzheimer's, dementia. You got to have some good fat in our diet. We were always told no fat, but you got to have some good fat in your diet. So if you can drink whole milk, and I know that it bothers the farmers too when we have things like almond milk, and they don't call it milk. They call it nut juice. They don't like the fact that it's called milk. But. Yes.
What is your philosophy on how we can nudge this country on fossil fuel versus renewables?
Yes. Well, we have to do a lot more with renewables, is the way I would like to go. I don't believe the position that my opponent has taken, that we are somehow showing leadership, or the president showed leadership by backing out of the Paris Climate Accord. We need to do, our leadership would be, as the world's second largest carbon emitter, we have to show leadership by leading the way on fighting back against climate change. We're not going to do that by doubling down on fossil fuels. We're going to do that by doubling down on renewables. But we have to also make investments in our infrastructure. One of the biggest problems we have in New York State is that we have a very old infrastructure. Our grid is very old. And there are bottlenecks of energy all over the state because we can't get it transported to areas of the state that need more energy. So we need to upgrade our infrastructure to be able to bring new forms of renewable online. For the North Country, sometimes they have to dump hydropower because they can't get it onto the grid. It's been challenging for wind and solar and other forms to be able to get onto the grid because of the age of the infrastructure. So I think we need a real infrastructure program in this country that can actually help invest in updating our grids, which then will not only keep us safer here and less susceptible to attacks and some of the hacking that's been going on, but also will help encourage more renewable types of energy to get onto the grid.
And how about distributed generation and, you know, solar panels on our own personal house roofs?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Look, my wife's waiting till our roof is done so we can put solar panels on. And I think we should be doing more to try and incentivize that. It's creating good jobs, green jobs. It's cutting down on energy costs. So the more we can help incentivize those kinds of programs, I think that's a good investment.
Being a public health nurse, I've worked in community health for a number of years. So I'm concerned about the environment, and I'm also concerned about environmental deregulation and dismantling of the EPA.
Me too.
What's your stand on that, and how might we get our country back? Because I really do feel like it's been a corporate coup.
It's been awful. I think Scott Pruitt, if I had my pick of the worst, I don't know, it's so hard. Betsy DeVos bothers me a lot too. Scott Pruitt, I think, is probably doing more damage right now than any other administrator or cabinet level member in the administration because of the rollback of regulation. Really, it's just a lack of respect for the EPA and their charge. You know, Maggie was saying the last time there was something political that happened in this house was Richard Nixon. It was a fundraiser for Richard Nixon. I hope this turns out a lot better than that did. Richard Nixon created the EPA. I mean, you know, we have to get back to being able to use the EPA to fight back on climate change. You know, Scott Pruitt has a fundamental difference on the role of the EPA and its role in fighting back on climate change. But we were going in the right direction previously, and now we've completely halted any progress and are now backtracking. And he is just bought and paid for it. Bought and paid for it.
There were years that it took to even build up the EPA, so
Right.
it was actually an effective agency.
Right.
That's, you know, we're going to have to do that all over again.
Absolutely.
So I'm certainly a proponent of that.
Me too. Me too. You know, we're going to have to fix a lot of things that have been broken over the last year and a half.
And we will.
Yeah, we will.
I'm so concerned about the waste of everything. Funds, food, I mean, just, how can we start that just in New York State?
You mean food that's being wasted in like schools or what?
Just every kind of waste, I mean, tax dollars, food, just, it seems so rampant. Everything is just where it could be better used.
Right, right.
I don't know how to build a system that's gonna take the waste into something that's.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it gets back to a lot of my early talk about money in politics. I think that there are ways to cut back on waste and fraud, but there's also a lot of interest out there that are just happy with the way things are going. And when you have so much money being pumped into political campaigns from corporate special interests who see no incentive on changing course or are trying to lobby for particular issues, and you have elected officials that are beholden to that, there's no incentive for them to want to change course to try and cut things like waste and other things. You know, you look at waste in defense budgets, you look at waste all across government, but that waste is benefiting someone, I guess, and they just are very happy to keep that going. So, you know, I think if we can get back to a situation where, you know, ideally if we could overturn and make a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, I would be all in favor of that. But short of that, you know, we can do more things to tighten up campaign finance laws in this country, whether it's more disclosure, whether it's more transparency. You know, we just passed a bill here in New York State to require that when you see these online political ads on Facebook, you know, now no one has to disclose who's behind these ads. So we just passed a law here in New York that, at least for state elections, we can't control what happens at the federal level. There has to be disclosure as to who's behind those kinds of ads. Or when I talk about dark money in politics, we have something here in New York State which is called the LL, pump money into campaigns or issue ads that they want to promote, which are really misleading because you don't know who's behind these campaigns sometimes. Now, I remember I was a victim of this a couple of years back because I was not being supportive of some of the things that were happening in terms of public education. So a group that was very pro tax credits for very wealthy private schools down in New York City started mailing my constituents all these mailers that Anthony Brindisi was not supportive of school teachers. And they, there was this bill for this tax credit which would essentially give, it was being pushed by these hedge fund managers who, they send their kids to very wealthy schools downstate, and they wanted to be able to get a tax credit. It was like an 80% tax credit for every dollar they give to scholarship fund for some of these private schools. So the state's actually paying you back 80 cents on the dollar for your philanthropy. And then as part of that bill, they put something in there that, we would also give $250 to teachers who buy supplies in the classroom, in public or private schools. So they started saying, well, he's not supporting teachers who are buying supplies for kids, not telling them what the bill really does. And they were able to do that because they were able to hide behind these kinds of corporations that they can form that allow them to do this without any disclosure. So.
What are the chances of us overturning Citizens United?
Well, I think if we can start getting some more like-minded people in office, if we can start building up some of these state legislatures, which would ultimately is what it's going to take, because you're going to need the states to adopt this, and start electing some Democratic governors and people who want to get, I'm not just saying Democratic governors, anyone who wants to get money out of politics, I think is someone who's worthy of consideration, because it is the root of all evil. It really is. Any issue, whether it's the EPA, whether it's education, whether it's tax cuts, whether it's health care, you name it. There are thousands and thousands of lobbyists who are pushing issues to try and drive the conversation, which is directly in contrast with what we're all about here and what we would like to see.
So as a junior congressman, do you see yourself writing legislation, or is that something that you're going to do a few years down the line?
I would like to be. I would like to legislate. I see a number of areas that I would like to work on. One of the things that I worked on here in New York State, which I think we can do a lot more at the federal level, is really expand job training programs and courses in our middle schools and our high schools for students who are going into career and technical education fields. So one of the things that I was able to do in New York State was create this career and technical education diploma pathway in our high schools. So students who are interested in going into the trades or into manufacturing or healthcare or hospitality have an avenue to be able to pursue in high school in addition to the traditional Regents diploma. That's something that we need to be doing a lot more of in our country, because if you look at New York State in particular, but it's like this everywhere, in the next 10 years in New York, half of the job openings that are going to become available are in what's called middle skills. So jobs that require more than a high school diploma but less than a 4-year degree. And there are a lot of these jobs that are out there right now in New York's 22nd district that are going unfilled because employers cannot find enough skilled labor to meet their demands. I always talk about this company in Herkimer County that I've talked to over the years, who at one point when I was touring the business, they said it's just a small machine shop. I think they employ 25 or 30 people, but it's, they do work on 3D printers and robotics, and they build parts for the Mars rover and other companies. And I remember talking to the owner of the company, because we were outside after I was touring his company, and they had to sign up to talk about how they were hiring. And I asked him, how's it going? He said, terrible. I can't find enough skilled labor to meet the kinds of needs that I have. And I could start people off at $50,000 a year. That's a great living in our area. And we have, not enough young people going into these kinds of careers, and not enough programs for adults returning back into these careers. As we become more and more automated in this country, we are not doing enough to retrain people for jobs that will be available. So maybe we're not, delivering the package, but we're building the drone that's going to start delivering the package. That kind of stuff.
Yep.
We have to do a lot more with automation, because that could put a lot of people in our area out of business and out of jobs. So if I can help craft legislation to help incentivize some of these programs, I want to do that. But I think ultimately, I want to be responsive to the constituents and the issues that I see in this area. So where I can help address issues here, that's going to be my focus of legislation. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Two things.
Yes.
Since you started your campaign, have you gotten grayer?
Well, someone actually accused me of dyeing it this color. I think it's since I got into politics in the assembly, I've gotten grayer, because I've been looking at my campaign staff has showed me some pictures from when I was first elected to the assembly, and I've gotten much grayer. But I can't blame politics. My mother was actually premature gray, but you'd never know it. So I think it's probably just something that's hereditary, and I'm not escaping it. But I still got it, so it's here. I don't mind if it's gray, because it looks like I still have it.
The second thing,
Yes.
if we can get whole milk back into our schools,
Yes.
because that's a real problem.
Yeah.
That's at the federal government level.
Yes.
And we need a voice in Shenango County. We really do need a strong voice.
Absolutely. Well, that's one thing I brought up earlier, how it was a mistake going to skim milk in our schools, because it's more sugar, and the fat is just not in there, which is good for those students whose brains are still developing to have that good fat. So we need a stronger voice for our dairy farmers in Washington, and that's something that I'm going to do a lot more of as I start to do more and more farm tours to learn about their issues. That's the #1 issue I'm hearing right now, because it's so immediate, the impact and the things that are happening to our dairy farmers.
And if you can get milk that has 36 and then numbers after that.
That means it's local,
That
right?
means-
More local?
Yeah, it's local, and numbers after that tell where in New York State that was processed.
Yes.
Because that's a really big, just McDonald's going into butter instead of margarine is big. Tons and tons of milk is being used, so.
Right. Look, I think that's a great, your point is well taken, and I think it's not just schools. We can be doing so much more in our state to try and partner. We have New York City, which is one of the largest public schools. The more we can get them to buy goods, agricultural products from upstate farmers, think of what a great way to encourage economic development and health, safety, and health, and everything else in both parts. We have this whole upstate, downstate divide. One of the things that I worked on in the assembly, and I'm always trying to find more partnerships, is I think you gain a better respect and appreciation for other members when you travel to their districts. Because we're all fighting for our districts. We always think it's the most important thing is what's happening in our district, but it's also important to learn what's happening in other parts of the country and other parts of the state. So one thing I've always tried to make a point of doing is travel to my colleagues in New York City or out in Western New York or other parts of the state to learn what are their concerns and where can we actually find some partnerships to help both areas. Food production is probably one of the best areas we can partner with folks downstate, because if you've been to Brooklyn lately, there's a lot of up-and-coming food companies, but one of the biggest challenges they have is space to do manufacturing. So if we can somehow build partnerships where we're not taking jobs from New York City, but we're actually helping them to grow their businesses and do some food production here, I think that's a good thing. We have a great example in Utica, and I always tease my colleagues from Brooklyn about this, because if you buy a Brooklyn lager, it's made in Utica, New York. Now, that's helped Brooklyn Beer, because they're able to concentrate in their facility in New York City on some of their more high-end specialty products and things like that, and the Brooklyn Lager is made by Saranac Beer. So.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add to something Denise was saying. We heard the other day in a committee meeting on agriculture about this milk thing. And one thing that I remember hearing, a woman who's been a farmer for years, and Kenise maybe even add to this, the number 36 will not appear on milk that's sold in Walmart.
No.
No.
period.
Really?
So I said good, because I hate Walmart.
All the more reasons to stay away.
You got it.
I don't know if I should open up this can of worms, but we're talking about agriculture in upstate New York. And you're all avoiding the topic that would make this area a lot wealthier than it is right now.
You don't do it, I
And I
will.
want to know how do you feel about marijuana?
Oh, it's just 420, right? So,
And these farmers,
how do I feel about
we
marijuana,
have-
or
we
how
have
do I
this-
feel about legalizing it?
and I ask this is an economic question, strictly.
Well, no, it's not that, and I'm gonna tag on, and I'm gonna say it's not just an economic, because
No, it isn't. It's a
I wanna know
public
about
health
medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, hemp, and the opioid epidemic.
Oh, try to get them all. So medical marijuana, I was one of the lead sponsors in New York State on the medical marijuana bill, because what helped educate me about that, because I didn't know much about it when I first started looking into the issue, was talking to a young family outside of Utica, and they had a daughter who was 11 years old, who had a very rare form of epilepsy, and she would actually have multiple seizures, drop seizures every day, and where she would just fall and hit her head and do more damage. The more and more seizures you're having, especially when your brain is developing, is detrimental to the brain development. And they really were the lead in trying to push through medical marijuana here in the state, because they know that they've been on all kinds of FDA, the most addictive narcotic types of medication, FDA approved, but they had been working with a family out in Colorado whose child has similar disorder, and found that medical marijuana actually helped lessen the seizures.
Right.
And that was critical for them, because she was getting, as she got older and older, they want to be able to stop the seizures so their brain can develop healthy. So it's had a lot of promise. I think we could be doing a lot more in New York State for medical marijuana. Recreational use, so this is an issue, again, I'm learning a lot more about. I really honestly have not taken a side one way or the other. I think that as we learn more from some of the other states that have decided to legalize marijuana, we can take some of the lessons there and perhaps apply it across the country. I certainly see a lot of promise in treating things, veterans returning home with PTSD, people who are addicted to opioids, all of that. Parkinson's, it has many benefits, and if it can be taxed and regulated, done in a safe manner, that's something we should be doing a lot more study about. I really don't think marijuana should be treated like a Schedule I drug like it is right now. I think the FDA is way behind the times in studying marijuana, and where they have lapsed, you see many colleges and universities stepping in to fill the void. But the federal government needs to be doing a lot more study on that. We're conducting a study now in the state of New York through our health department on that particular topic. So I'm open, and I'm going to listen to everybody and try and make an informed decision. So I'm not someone who's really tied to one side or the other. The opioid issue is an issue that is having devastating impacts on the whole country, but our area in particular. And I've seen statistics from each county how the number of overdoses and opioid-related deaths have skyrocketed in this part of New York State. It's really happening everywhere, but it's hitting us hard. We got to go after these drug companies and these distributors. The distributors in particular really, in my opinion, turned a blind eye to this crisis. And in many cases, we're profiting very heavily off of pumping millions of pills into parts of this country that didn't need millions of pills in circulation.
Right, towns in Kentucky that are smaller than Oxford.
Yeah. There's one, I watched the 60 Minutes a couple months ago that profiled the one in West Virginia that has about 500 people in it. And there's an order for like millions and millions of opioids. It's like, come on, you guys don't see what's going on here? Something's happening when those pills are delivered to the ground. We've done a lot in the state, and more states are doing this to really crack down on over-prescribing and doctor shopping and things like that, but because of that, people are now turning to heroin and heroin that's being cut with fentanyl to really get the effects that they want to get. And fentanyl is particularly deadly. When you cut heroin with fentanyl, your chances of overdose and death way up. So we got to get our hands around this. We're not going to do it by arresting our way out of the problem. We need to do more in enforcement as companies that are pushing this, holding them accountable. We have to do more in terms of treatment and prevention, particularly hard to get access to treatment programs in many parts of the state. And we need to do a lot more at the federal level to help get people access to treatment. In Oneida County, I was talking to the sheriff a couple weeks ago. He wants to have a substance abuse treatment program in the correctional facility because people are coming into the facility. For every 10 inmates, 7 of them have admitted to using opioids or heroin in the last year. So he doesn't want to keep these people in prison. He wants to get them better. And he's trying to find some kind of funding for a long-term treatment program, so when they are released having that gone through that treatment program,
Right,
and less likely to get back.
He has to have the medical capacity to treat them if they're going through detox.
Right, and they don't have that right now.
Yeah.
They really don't. So we got to do a lot more investment, because we don't want to arrest people and put them in jail, but we got to also make sure that we have the programs in place so they can get access to treatment.
To add on to that, if you were to support legalizing marijuana, would you also support something that would release inmates, particularly people of color that were arrested for having small amounts of marijuana?
Well, what we should do is we should decriminalize small amounts. And then hopefully people won't end up in prison. It's a fact of life that people are being put in prison for possession of very small amounts of marijuana, and then for the rest of their lives they have this now on their record, which impairs their ability to get a good job, to get into school, you name it. So that's where we should be looking at that. It's people of color are being treated a lot differently when they're referred to the criminal justice system than a couple of white frat kids smoking a joint at a college campus.
So I want to figure out about the divide of the people here that I've known since I've moved here. So there's one population that always says, oh, it's all of them, the welfare people, that are taking all our money, and they do nothing, and they get all these things. And when the poverty level is at 45% in this county, and the working poor, when they try to do their best, they get penalized because now they make a little money and they can't get the help that they get. So I think there has to be some kind of system change somewhere.
Yes.
And how do you see that?
Well, 2 areas where I think overall there has to be system change. I think many of the systems that we have set up right now are meant to keep people in poverty, not get people out of poverty. 2 areas where we need to make better investments are in childcare and transportation. I just went through, I've been working with the United Way up in Utica. We did this whole anti-poverty initiative up in Utica to try and get to the root causes, to bring people who are living in poverty into the process to learn about what are the issues and what is our role and how can we help lift people out of poverty. The issue that came up more than any other topic was childcare. And I know, I wasn't surprised because as an assembly member, I hear this all the time from constituents. A single mother is offered a job who is receiving a child care subsidy. However, if they take this job, they will then lose their child care subsidy because they will then pass a certain threshold that allows them to get that child care. They have no relative, they have no way to afford a babysitter, so what do? They don't take the job. So we need to be making more investments in child care to help people who are seeking employment get employment. We also have to make better investments in our transportation systems, particularly in rural areas where rural transportation is very difficult to come by, public transportation. And again, I hear in parts of my assembly district, which tend to be a little more rural, that if the bus doesn't run there, or if you know, the one challenge we have is we have this one business park where the bus, I've been trying to get, we have Centro, trying to get them to add a route to go into this particular business park, because then we can, people have been offered positions there, but they can't take them because they don't own a car, so how do they get there? So if we can improve our transportation connections to get people to where they gotta go, and then they will be able to get out of poverty and hopefully have a good paying job, which will help cut down on some of the social services that we have to pay for. I don't think we can just blame poor people either, you know.
And I don't think we can give tax cuts to the rich either.
I don't think, well, look, it wasn't, you know, we all know what created the financial crisis of 2007, 2008. It wasn't people living in the 22nd district of New York State. It was people living on Wall Street, making very risky financial investments with our money, losing pensions, losing 401ks. It was unconscionable. And the person I'm running against, who sits on the financial services company, whose charge is to regulate these industries, wants to roll back every single regulation that was put in place after the 2007-2008 financial crisis, which will then be detrimental to our economy here. And she's doing it, you know, she'll say that, oh, well, community banks. Well, many of the community banks I've talked to in this area like some of those regulations because they also got hurt during the financial crisis through no fault of their own, but because the larger banks made such terrible decisions, it had a ripple effect up and down the scale. So, you know, clipping the wings of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which she thinks should be completely removed, you know, rolling back Dodd-Frank regulations that were put in place. That's not the way we should be going. We need to make sure that those banks, those hedge funds are held accountable for what happened back in 2007, 2008, not give them a pass.
Absolutely. And my rationale was always that these big companies, these big corporations, these big oil and gas, they put more wear and tear on the infrastructure than any other segment of the population. You know, so they really should pay a higher share and help fund some of these ideas that you're talking about.
Yeah. Look, because of this tax bill, our ability on the federal level to invest in things like infrastructure, to continue to make investments and keep strong Social Security and Medicare are going to be very harmed down the road. She campaigned as someone who was against debts and deficits, but upon arriving to Washington, she just voted for one of the largest debt increases we've seen, which is really going to hinder our ability to do some of the things we need to do in this country, all to give a big tax cut to people who did not need a tax cut.
So I think we're actually going to stop doing questions for right now, but we'll still be, Andy will still be around to mingle and talk to people one-on-one.
I want to have a big job.
Yeah. Hopefully you all help me, because this is going to be, I can't stress enough, I'll just close by saying this. This is going to be, again, one of the most competitive races.
We're going to work Shenango County.
We're going to work Shenango County, and where I can show up and be visible and talk to Democrats and Republicans or independents, you let me know and I'll go there.
And are you going to be someplace on Wednesday in Norwich?
Yes. Please come to the town hall meeting we're having at the YMCA in Norwich on Wednesday at 7.
And is that on your Facebook page?
That is on the Facebook page.
Okay.
It was in the newspaper. Bring your friends. I want to open it up to everybody. We hold town hall meetings where I just call on folks and take questions. You don't have to write them down beforehand. I'm not screening your questions. This is a true town hall meeting where you can come and express your opinions or ask questions. So thank you for that. And thank you for coming here today, because this is going to help. We have people on our side in this campaign, and that's what's going to drive us over the edge.
Could I just ask one favor?
Sure.
That when you get elected and
Yes.
somebody writes you a letter complaining or whatever, that you don't
that your staff, whoever, doesn't just send back a form letter that says, although we may not agree on every issue, please understand that I'm working through it. Issue that the letter was directed at. I
Absolutely.
would appreciate it.
Yes, you have to have issue-oriented response letters, not just the generic. Well, I mean, this is a problem with consistency in her office. She is on her 3rd chief of staff. She's actually, they listed the top 10 worst bosses to work for in Washington, and she was in the top 10. That's based on staff turnover, because there's no consistency. And you have that consistency, and then you just pass off the one form letter, not really diving down into the issue.
But she's got a fully funded staff, doesn't she?
Sure.
And she gets that from dark money.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.